You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 256. Today we're talking about the power of self-compassion with Kristin Neff. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast, now with over 1 million downloads. Here it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have, and when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of Mindful Parenting, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide for breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Welcome back, dear listener. I hope this season finds you well. We are right around the Christmas season here. You know, whatever you celebrate, it's a time of taking stock of family, thinking about lightness, maybe even thinking about the new year, spiritual reflection, all kinds of, it's a time of reflection, I think. That's how it is for me anyway. Maybe it is for you. And in just a moment, I'm going to be offering you a very special replay of a conversation I had in 2017 with Kristin Neff. And she is a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research. She's conducted the first empirical studies on self-compassion over a decade ago. And in conjunction with her colleague, Dr. Germer, she's developed an empirically supported 8-week training program called the Mindful Self-Compassion and offers workshops on self-compassion worldwide. And this piece, I think, is so important to bring back, right? That the research shows that our harsh self-criticism does not work. It does not help us grow and become better parents. And in fact, it really does the opposite. So we're going to talk about what is your self-talk like when you mess up, and how could you offer yourself the same kindness that you would a dear friend. And this is a very, very powerful conversation. So I'm so excited for you to join me at the table as I talk to Dr. Kristin Neff. Kristin, I'm so thrilled to have you on the Mindful Mama podcast. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Your work on self-compassion is so groundbreaking as far as shifting the way that we think about what it takes to sort of grow and what it takes to thrive, and shifting attitudes, hopefully, bit by bit. They're seeping into the culture. But what brought you to this research for you in your own life? What made you interested in this?
Yeah, well, I certainly didn't invent the idea. I actually learned about self-compassion at a local mindfulness group I was going to, where I was learning meditation. And the group I was going to really emphasized self-compassion and the importance of being kind, supportive with yourself. So I really started practicing it, and it changed my life almost immediately. I couldn't believe the difference it made. Just learning to, again, be there for myself, support myself, give myself encouragement, kindness, comfort when I was upset. It was like I had this resource that I didn't even realize I had. And I suppose, my contribution was that I had done some work. I'd actually done 2 years of postdoctoral training with one of the country's leading self-concept researchers. And I'd been looking at self-esteem and a lot of the problems with the self-esteem literature, it's not so much that self-esteem is bad, but how we get it is not necessarily very healthy. And I just thought, wow, self-compassion is such a nice alternative to self-esteem, because it's a way of feeling good about yourself, but it doesn't require feeling better than others or being special and above average. So I kind of, gave it a shot and developed a scale to measure it and started the research ball rolling. And now it just has a huge life of its own. It's really quite exciting.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you really point out in the book how self-esteem and self-compassion are different. So can you talk a little bit to that? What is the difference, and why is self-compassion trump self-esteem?
Right. Well, so self-esteem is basically, it partly depends how you define it. If you think
Hmm.
of unconditional self-worth, well, then it's a little bit more like self-compassion. But typically, self-esteem focuses on how much you like yourself, like how positive your self-evaluation is, right? And most of us do some pretty nasty things to feel good about ourselves. For instance, why do bullies in early middle school start to bully? So that they can feel good about themselves, so they can feel bigger and smarter and cooler and stronger than that little wimpy kid they're picking on, right?
Hmm.
Um, Prejudice stems from the need for high self-esteem. And the other problem with self-esteem is that for most people, it's contingent on success. So, maybe you have high self-esteem on a good hair day, but not so much on a bad hair day. Or when you succeed at a work project, but then your self-esteem deserts you when you have a failure. So it's more contingent, and it's more based on social comparison, right? The need to be better than others to feel okay about myself. So,
Hmm.
I mean, we know self-esteem is good for well-being. People are less depressed, less anxious, happier really when they have high self-esteem. But the way they get their self-esteem is not always so healthy. So self-compassion, it really offers all the same mental health benefits of self-esteem in the other word, in the sense that, you aren't judging yourself, you don't feel bad about yourself, you feel like a worthy human being, but it's not based on being better than others. It's just based on being like a flawed, imperfect human being like everyone else. I can check that box. I can do that. It's not conditional, right? Yet the idea is right when self-esteem fails you, and that's when you make a mistake or you do something wrong. Um, self-compassion steps in to pick up the pieces. Self-compassion
Mm.
says, hey, you failed. Well, it happens. I'm still here for you. I still care about you, regardless of whether or not you failed or succeeded. So, we know, for instance, through research, that the sense of self-worth linked to self-compassion is much more stable than the sense of self-worth linked to self-esteem, which tends to go up and down a lot more. So you might say it has the benefits without the pitfalls.
Well, it's interesting because I guess the way you're talking about it, when we look at self-esteem, it's really something that's based on judgment, right? Like I judge myself as this
Yes.
place and you're at this place. And it's all about kind of judging where you are, whether you're good or bad on the scale, and all about, comparing to others. And then just looking at ourselves with self-compassion, obviously, is just having that innate understanding that it's hard. It's hard to be a human being. It's not easy.
That's right. And that making mistakes and imperfections is actually part of what makes us human. Right. So when we're on the self-esteem treadmill, it's almost as if we keep chasing after perfection. Like if we try that a little bit
Mm-hmm.
harder, maybe we'll be perfect or at least close to it. Whereas self-compassion just abandons that agenda, and we just learn to support ourselves as we are and to feel worthy as we are. We don't have to accomplish anything to be worthy. All human beings are worthy of kindness and respect. And then, of course, it doesn't mean we don't also want to grow and reach our full potential, but we don't grow and reach our full potential because we aren't good enough as we are. We want to grow and reach our full potential because we care about ourselves. We want to be happy. So the motivation of self-compassion is quite different than the motivation of self-esteem.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I think there's kind of a fear of it, right? Like people are worried that they're not going to, if I'm compassionate with myself, if I'm not hard on myself and harsh on myself, then I'm not going to become better, because I am flawed and I need to become better. But you point out in your book that research says that it's actually easier to admit areas of improvement and make improvement when we are self-compassionate.
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, research shows that the number one block to self-compassion, as you say, is the fear that, we'll be unmotivated, we're going to lose our edge, we aren't going to reach our goals. We really think that the only thing that gets us moving is fear of self-punishment. But there is another thing that gets us moving, and that's kindness and encouragement, right? So if you think back to maybe, high school matter, maybe you're on a sports team or in drama club or something, maybe you had the experience of two different types of coaches. One was the really mean coach. He said, you'll never amount to anything, you lazy good for nothing, and yells at you all the time. Well, it is kind of going to work, right? You're going to want to avoid the coach yelling at you. So you're going to try, but it backfires in the long run because you lose faith in yourself. You get nervous because you're agitated. You have a lot of performance anxiety. And at the end of the day, you're more likely to give up. But hopefully you also had some experience of a really kind, encouraging coach. So when you said, yeah, it's okay, you messed up, but here's how to make it better. Who gave you constructive criticism, who believed in you, who encouraged you, who supported you. Now, typically those types of coaches we learn a lot more from, and we're a lot more motivated by. So it's really just learning to, again, be this good, supportive inner coach inside, as opposed to the mean one who yells at us all the time. So both work, but what research definitely shows that it's more effective to be compassionate, and that when you fail, you're more likely to pick yourself up and try again. You're less afraid of failure, and you're more likely to keep trying even when things are difficult. And that's really what we need with motivation.
So you're really talking about, and it's amazing to me how many things come down to this. I'm very interested in the way we learn and the way we act in life. But what I'm hearing you saying is that it really is coming down to that intrinsic, internal motivation versus the external motivation. You're kind of pointing out the difference between the fear of the punish, carrot and the stick kind of thing versus I want to do this, whatever I want to do, because this is just life and this is what I want to do. And it's okay for me to make mistakes because I have this compassion. Yeah.
Yes. And that's a very good point. In an odd way, self-criticism is a type of extrinsic motivation. You aren't doing it because you want to learn and grow. You're doing it because you're afraid of punishment. So even though it comes from the inside, it's still an extrinsic motivator. There's tons of research showing that intrinsic motivation, wanting to learn and grow because you're curious and you're interested, and, failure is a learning opportunity, that's much more effective and much more sustainable over time.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. Child sponsorship is you making a decision to provide $39 a month for a child in their community in extreme poverty to provide the most basic necessities of life. But most importantly, you provide hope. It is one of the most effective ways to help the world's most vulnerable children and their communities address the impacts of this pandemic and lift themselves out of poverty for good, especially now. In the world's most fragile places, devastating aftershocks of the COVID-19 crisis are pushing families deeper into poverty, putting kids at greater risk of hunger, malnutrition, violence, and neglect. It breaks my heart to hear that. Those who are suffering most in the world should suffer even more because of this. But the reality is that thousands of children are waiting to be sponsored. What you don't know is that everything is about to change. So for the first time, World Vision is inviting you to empower a child through sponsorship, yet instead of you choosing them, they choose you, something no NGO has ever done before. It doesn't matter who you are or where in the world you live. Every single one of us wants to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. I know I do. I want to be seen, loved, and chosen. And by those who love me most, it makes all the difference in the world. So you can put the power to choose in a child's hands and give someone a chance to step into a life-changing relationship with you. So you can visit worldvision.org/hunter to sponsor a child. You'll see this amazing video about how the kids get to choose the sponsors. It is so, so powerful. But if child sponsorship isn't a thing for you, go to worldvision.org/hunter and check out their charity gift catalog. You can give a goat and 2 chickens, or goats or ducks. There's a whole list of gifts that you can give. And I know that every holiday season, my daughters get to choose a place to give money. And this can be such a great way to include your child in giving. There's this adorable image of the chickens that your child can give for $25, which is so, so beautiful. Go to worldvision.org/hunter today. So this interests me because then it goes, so it goes back to parenting and kind of how we were raised and things like that. And I feel like in our society and in our culture, we have a long history of very authoritarian families where there's a lot of harsh criticism. There's a lot of punishment there, in years past, there's whippings and beatings, and real extreme, like external punishment for trying to sort of get people to do what they want, children to do what they want to do. So how does if we want self-compassion, right? So the opposite of that is our self-criticism. So where does that come from? How is that shaped in our lives, that internal voice?
Yeah, well, certainly, I think there are a lot of influences, but certainly we know that one is how our parents raised us. So people who are raised by very critical parents, unsurprisingly tend to be more self-critical. People who are raised with secure attachment to their parents, that knew that their parents would, accept them unconditionally, they're more likely to have self-compassion than those who their love was contingent, or, some people had really abusive parents, and they're the ones who struggle the most with self-compassion because it wasn't modeled for them at all. But I think it's not just parents. I also think there is a lot of pressure in our culture to be perfectionistic. And I think a lot of the messages we get in the media are, you got to do it, you got to succeed, got to buy my product in order to be a worthwhile person. So I think we're also influenced by those messages. And what I think is happening with self-compassion, and this kind of relates to the whole topic of parenting, is we're really kind of re-parenting ourselves, right? When we fail or we're struggling or we're afraid, we actually give ourselves the type of unconditional love, warm support, and nourishment that, maybe we didn't get from our parents. Hopefully we did, but maybe we didn't. Regardless, now as adults, we can give it to ourselves. And so we start to learn to do things like tune in to how we're speaking to ourselves. What type of language are we using? What's our tone of voice? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it harsh? And then we actually learn to create an internal dialogue that kind of represents this ideally compassionate parent or friend to a child.
Oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to respond to in what you said, and that, that being able to even be in touch with that internal voice, obviously we need to be able to sort of hear it and see it, and that mindfulness, and that's one of the 3, parts of your self.
Yeah, and it's the first step.
Yeah.
None of this is possible without mindfulness. Mindfulness is the foundation. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But then I'm thinking about the parents who are listening to you and saying, like, and we want to think that we love our kids unconditionally. Like, of course, everyone might say, I love my kids unconditionally. But what happens is when our kids sometimes have like really big, difficult feelings like anger and, frustration, and they go, they're losing it maybe at us, our behavior kind of shows that it's really hard to then love your kids unconditionally in that moment, especially, is it true? Is it true that it maybe especially if we have trouble accepting our own difficult feelings and having that compassion for ourselves?
Yes. Well, so put it this way, the link between how compassionate you are to yourself and how compassionate you are to others isn't actually that strong, just because and also is in a certain direction. So there are a lot of people who are actually very kind and compassionate to others who treat themselves badly. So it's actually not really true that you have to be kind to yourself to be good to others. There's lots of people who do it. It's more that it's just hard to sustain being kind to others if you aren't kind to yourself. So what happens, if let's say you're a caregiver or a parent, what you need to do with your parent and your child starts screaming or losing it or something, is you actually first need to give yourself compassion, and that will give you the resources needed to sustain compassion for your child, right? So it's not like you need to have the compassion in order to be compassionate, but it's so much easier to get thrown off track, to lose it, to be reactive when you aren't saying, oh, it's so difficult that my child's losing it. And first, tend to your own needs, put on your own oxygen mask first before you try to calm your child down. And that's certainly something I learned with my son, who is autistic, that, if I lost it, and let's face it, I did, sometimes I would lose it, but he would actually just get more agitated very quickly if my way of being with him was agitated. But when I could remember to give myself compassion and just, remember this is so hard for me right now, and, kind of care for myself first, then not only would I have more resources to attend to him, but he actually fed off of my mood. And if I was calmer, he was calmer. So, I think it's absolutely essential for parents to have self-compassion, especially when they're struggling with their child. If you just try to say, oh, I love my child unconditionally without tending to your own needs first, it's going to be really hard to sustain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to what you're saying about sort of our inner dialogue and kind of noticing our inner dialogue. And you write in your book that if we had control over our maladaptive thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, you wouldn't still have them, which I thought was such a wonderful, a statement. Why, of course, don't we realize that, right? Clearly we don't have complete control of our actions, or else I'd only act in ways that we approved of. I mean, that was so, I love those times when it's just of course. So can you talk to that and tell us what you mean a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think this comes from the illusion of independence and control. Somehow we think we're these totally independent units who have complete free will, and we can do what we want and be perfect and get it right all the time. But that's just not reality. We are interdependent in so many ways. The weather, what we've eaten, what that person just said to us, the political climate, my body, the fact that my hormones are, going a certain way, which I didn't choose. There are so many causes and conditions that lead us to think as we do, that lead us to have the emotional reactions we do. So really, we don't have a lot of control. And one of the biggest gifts of mindfulness practice, and especially meditation practice, is kind of realizing that this idea that we have control is an illusion. But although we don't have total control, it doesn't mean we can't do anything either. So what we can learn to do is learn how to relate with kindness to whatever's arising. And, we can make a couple adjustments, and we can do what we can. It's not like we can't do anything. It's not like we're totally passive, but we just need to realize that perfection is actually not attainable. So just do the best we can and kind of, care for ourselves. And when we make a mistake, just try to be understanding and give ourselves support and encouragement so that we're maximizing the conditions out of which hopefully skillful action will grow. You can't really control yourself, but you can try to plant the seeds that are more likely to grow into better actions. So it's just a different model. It's more of a natural model, which is true, right? A plant doesn't grow on its own. It needs water and it needs soil, but you also can plant seeds if it's one plant or another. So that's what we're really doing with compassion, is we're just trying to water the seeds of wholesomeness and not spend as much time watering the seeds that lead to bad behavior or harmful behavior.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. Parents who homeschool or want to homeschool, are you overwhelmed with all the work and responsibilities on your shoulders right now? And for the parents with kids in school, have you avoided the need to pull your student out of public school system because it just seems too daunting to homeschool them yourself? Well, Homeschool Magnet is for parents just like you. Homeschool Magnet supports homeschooling families by providing students with instruction from world-class credentialed teachers in a remote classroom with their peers. Parents choose the best teachers for each student based on values and teaching approach to ensure every child is receiving exactly the education they desire. This puts you, the parent, in full control of your child's education without the daily responsibilities of lesson planning, pre-learning, teaching, tutoring, and grading. Each student will receive instruction in the 4 core subject areas of math, English language arts, science, and social studies. Parents ultimately have the freedom to involve their student in as much or as little learning as they prefer based on each student's learning goals. Other online schools exist, but Homeschool Magnet is unique. Even though Homeschool Magnet includes a robust online learning environment, each student works from real physical learning materials guided by video instruction from their teachers. This approach is similar to most remote college learning formats and will help prepare students for secondary school. Every student has daily access to their teachers who know their learning needs and can help with instruction and tutoring. Homeschool Magnet even gives your students the opportunity to join group video tutoring calls and homeroom-style group video calls for fun and socialization with friends. With Homeschool Magnet, you get the freedom and control of homeschooling without the burden. Homeschool Magnet is only a fraction of the cost of private schools, and the 30-day money-back guarantee upon enrollment means this choice is totally risk-free. Plus, enrollment and tuition are on a per-semester basis, so you're only committing for a short period of time, giving you even more flexibility to control and shape your child's education. To learn more about Homeschool Magnet's student experience, go to homeschoolmagnet.com and join the growing waitlist. That's homeschoolmagnet.com. Absolutely. Just like Thich Nhat Hanh says, we practice selective watering. I love that.
Exactly,
Yeah. So one thing that you brought up in your book that I love this is a little equation from, I think you said it came from Shinzen Young, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. So tell us what you mean by that.
Right. And so he's using the term suffering in a particular way, which is basically there's pain, emotional pain, physical pain, mental pain. But suffering is kind of it's directly a result of how much we resist the fact that pain is here. So just to give a kind of cliche example, if you're stuck in a traffic jam, yeah, it's annoying, and maybe you're going to be late, and that's painful and annoying. But if you get really angry at the fact that you're at a traffic jam and feel like I shouldn't be caught in a traffic jam, all those shoulds and resistance to the fact that something is happening just make things that much worse. And there's a lot of research that shows that the more we resist what's happening, not only does it make it more intense, but it makes things last longer, right? So whether that resistance is by getting really angry and frustrated, or whether the resistance comes from avoidance and like thought suppression, we know that the energy you give to a difficult thought or emotion by either suppressing it or reacting to it actually makes it stronger and makes it last longer. So it's so funny. My son, he's 15 now, and he hates self-compassion because he's like, don't give me that self-compassion, Mom. I don't want to accept the pain. And I'm like, okay, go for it. If you figure out a way how to make the pain go away, tell me about it, but I don't think it's really possible. That's the thing. It just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. If pain is here, it goes away in its own time, and we can try to help, create optimal conditions for it to pass. We can't force it to go. And if we try to force it to go, it just makes it worse. So that's really a basic principle of life, really, that I think most people come to recognize in one way or another. The good thing about self-compassion, so what self-compassion adds to mindfulness? Mindfulness talks a lot about non-resistance, being with what is in an accepting, non-judgmental way. But it doesn't necessarily, it kind of depends who's teaching the mindfulness, it doesn't necessarily talk about warmth and kindness and soothing. So in other words, yes, we need to accept what's here and not judge it, but it really helps if we say to ourselves, oh, this is so hard for you, darling. I'm here for you. What can I do to help? So that emotional warmth with actually, which helps us feel safe, which makes it easier not to resist. So the mindfulness is key, but in self-compassion, on top of the mindfulness, there's the kindness. And then there's also kind of the wisdom of recognizing common humanity, right? Just recognizing that, hey, we're all imperfect, we all struggle, we're all interdependent, and so you might think kindness and the wisdom of common humanity, they do arise naturally out of mindfulness practice, but if we bring them in explicitly and intentionally, it just makes it more powerful in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I coach women, and we work with this so much because we tend to be so hard on ourselves. I was thinking about you and in your story, and I imagine I imagine there were times as you were raising your son, as you said, he has autism, I imagine you must have been very grateful to have found these concepts and to have found these practices throughout your time raising your son.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know how I would have coped without them. I mean, the very day he got diagnosed, I was actually on my way to a meditation retreat, and I had been practicing mindfulness and self-compassion for about 7 years. And it's so funny, my husband, I said to him, don't worry, I'll cancel my retreat. We'll process this together. And he said, no, go to your retreat, do your self-compassion stuff, and then come back and help me, because he'd seen, how useful it was to help cope with challenge. So, when I was at the retreat, all these feelings were coming up for me, feelings you think you aren't supposed to have as a mother. Feelings of disappointment, even some irrational shame, fear. And this is toward the person you love most in the world, your precious child, But because of my practice, I knew that the only thing I really could do was to let it all in, to not judge any thoughts or feelings I was having as good or bad, just to let them arise. But most importantly, to just give myself great love and kindness and support and compassion for how hard it was, and just really trying to be there for myself, helping me to feel like, safe. And also, remembering common humanity. Yeah, so it was not all parents, they didn't face autism, but usually parents have some form of struggle or another with their kids. It could be other physical conditions, mental conditions, just conflictual relationships. It's not, because for a few moments, I started to go down the path of self-pity. Why me? Why can't I have a normal child like everyone else? And then I realized, what does that mean, a normal child? I mean, there's no child who's normal. It's just kind of a particular flavor of, some of the challenge. And so when I was able to do that, it just made it so much easier, first of all, to accept the autism, to accept the challenges that it posed for me, but really, ultimately, to accept Rowan. It just gave me so much more ability. The more I could accept myself and accept my difficult feelings and accept my pain around it, the more I had available to be with him as he was and to give to him. So I don't know how I've gotten through. I'm sure I would have, but it would have been a lot harder, I can tell you. Yeah.
I love what you're saying about this acceptance, right? Like what we resist persists, and that self-acceptance that is so essential to underlying this as parents. So what advice do you give parents who want to practice more self-compassion and maybe want to just be able to be more accepting of their kids?
Yeah. So again, the first thing to do is to not only accept, but it's more than acceptance. It's actively soothing, comforting, supporting, providing warmth to ourselves. So things like putting your hands on your heart, saying words, the types of encouraging, supportive words you might say to a friend, really actively kind of reparenting ourselves. Like, maybe if you were lucky and you had a good mother, when you were upset, she would, give you a hug and say just the right things, and the tone of her voice would be just what the tone you needed to hear to know that it was safe and it was going to be okay. Well, whether or not you actually had that type of mother, we can learn to do that with ourselves, to really say, what do I need right now to comfort and care for myself in the moment, and learn to start to give it to us. In addition to accepting all our pain and accepting all our imperfections, which is really key. And so I really, counsel parents, when you're feeling like you want to tear your kid's head off, and that happens, usually the first thought is guilt. Oh my God, I shouldn't be having the thought that I want to tear my kid's head off. I'm a bad mother. Then you might try to, or bad father, then you might try to like just love your little kid a little bit more conditionally in that moment. How well does that work? Really, a lot of it, especially as a parent, is giving yourself permission to validate and acknowledge your own pain. I think parenting is supposed to be a one-way street, that it's just about caring for the child, but you have to care for yourself as a parent. You have to say, this is so hard for me. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. And maybe, put your hands on your heart, or if you can we find that physical expressions of kindness are really powerful because the body is actually designed to respond to them because we're mammals. So if you can find some way of touching yourself that really lets your body know, hey, you're here, and it actually starts to change your physiology. You start to feel more safe. You start to feel, once you feel more safe, you actually have more options in terms of thinking how to respond. So really that first before you try to deal with your kid. But if it's just one way and you think you're just supposed to be this perfect parent, you're just supposed to give, and not care about your own needs, it really won't be very sustainable.
No. I mean, you listeners, take Kristin's advice and see her example of when she heard that diagnosis, that you went on a retreat and you took a number of days to yourself. And I think that's a really great example, to take that time to really ground yourself. That's beautiful.
But what I'm talking about is a little different than self-care. A lot of people are told for parents, you should have self-care. Well, let's face it, self-care isn't always possible. We aren't always in a position where we can go on a retreat, or we may not have the time or the money to get a massage or take a yoga class. So self-care is good. Do as much self-care as you can. But regardless of that, the problem with self-care is that it all happens off the job. Right? What we need a way to be there for ourselves in the midst of the struggle, when you're with your kid. When the conflict is happening, when the tantrum is happening, when the emotions are there, present in the moment, that's when you need self-compassion. So you can do simple practices like, I used to do this I still do it, but when my son was tantruming, right? Just breathing in for yourself, breathing in compassion for yourself, breathing in wishes for your own well-being for yourself. And then you can breathe out for your child. So it doesn't have to be one way, in for me, out for you, breathe in and out for you. Little practices like that you can do, which, don't take any time or money, can be done right there in the moment to help you get through those difficult times. So really the biggest thing parents need to do is just to remember to validate the fact that it's hard for them, to help, give themselves kindness and comfort and care and support in the midst of their challenges. And that is actually what's going to most enable them to be there for their kids.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. In our house, we have a wood stove, which I love. You can see me on Instagram sitting in front of the wood stove and warming my feet there. It's so awesome. What I don't love is the nasal discomfort and dryness that happens in the winter from my wood stove. But I'm psyched now because I have Zicam Nasal All Clear. Zicam Nasal All Clear keeps your nose clean, clear, and healthy as part of your daily routine. Only Zicam Nasal All Clear nasal swabs instantly deliver triple action benefit of protecting, cleansing, and soothing your nasal passages. Zicam Nasal All Clear is different because it's easy to use, convenient for on the go. It has a drug-free, non-saline-based moisturizing formula. I know that with the Zicam Nasal All Clear, I will not have to worry about my uncomfortable nose with my wood stove this winter, which is a relief. With Zicam Nasal All Clear, you can swab it out. It's available on Amazon. Search for Zicam Nasal All Clear. That's Zicam Nasal All Clear. ALLCLEAR. Yeah, yes. And after we lose it too, that comes to do those same
Yes.
things. So then, and that is what can enable us to grow and change and make different choices as best we can.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so like a lot of research. People think that if you're self-compassionate, it means letting yourself off the hook. It's exactly the opposite. Research shows that when it's safe to admit you failed because you have self-compassion, you're much more likely to admit it when you've made a mistake, and you're actually much more likely to try to repair the situation. Again, because you aren't like fighting against this feeling of, oh my God, if I admit that I did this, I will be flooded with shame. I'm not going to go there. I'm going to blame someone else, right? When it's safe to acknowledge you're imperfect and you make mistakes, you're much more likely to do so. So.
Oh, Kristin, oh my gosh, I could talk to you for hours on this. I love it. I can't thank you enough for the work that you've done, like making this, showing that through your, research that this is so, that these teachings that people have taught for many years are in fact true. And I really, really appreciate your work and what you've done. So how can the listener find out more about you and what you're doing besides get her amazing book, Self-Compassion? You'll love it.
Well, that's the place to start. And I've actually made my website a free resource. If you just Google self-compassion, you'll find it, selfcompassion.org. So I've got the research on there. If you're a research nerd, I have guided meditations, I have exercises, and in October, and there'll be a link on my website, that we're going to have an online self-compassion training course, like a shortened version of our 8-week course. It'll be 8 weeks, but only an hour a week. So that might be something you can think about taking when we come out with our workbook. That will also be on there. So I would just say go to my website and maybe even sign up for my mailing list, and I'll send you out notices when new things are available, including new meditations. So that's probably the easiest place to start.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today, Kristin. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Hunter. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. I love what Dr. Kristin Neff says about self-compassion. It really is so important that we start to turn around this judgmental way of thinking about ourselves and really make this a practice, right? To stop berating ourselves, start treating ourselves with kindness, and model this for the next generation, right? They really need it too. So I'm so glad that you have listened to this episode and this powerful conversation and this powerful research. So important. So I would love to see where you're listening to it. Take a screenshot of your device that you're listening and tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Mindful Mama Mentor and let me know what your takeaways are, or what are you going to do differently? How are you going to practice something different to make 2021 a more self-compassionate year for you? I really, really, truly want that for you. So thank you so much for listening. I am wishing you peace and contentment and serenity during this crazy 2020 holiday season. Thank goodness 2020 is out of here and we are going to a new year with 2021. I'm so excited. By the way, next week, we're going to have a best of 2020 episode with the top 5 episodes from 2020. We're going to give you the best clips from the top 5 episodes of 2020. So if you want to reflect on those with me, please join me for that episode. And I'll be back in your ears then. And I'm so excited for all the amazing guests we have in 2021. If you know a guest that would be amazing for the Mindful Mama podcast, you can go to mindfulmamamentor.com, and on the About page, there is a form to send me who you would like me to talk to. I would love to talk to some great people. So wishing you peace, wishing you well, my friend. Thank you so much for listening. Namaste.